talking about is an experience that I have too, and just about every American who travels. We live in a country that's got people coming in from all over the world. We have a global economy. We have just the ability, the technology that's available to travel and just transcend. Right now, we're doing it through Zoom to do this interview. We have interactions with different people all the time, and in a I'm thinking pre-modern, in a pre-modern world, um, the differences between people groups would have been so much starker. You would have looked at genetic differences, cultural differences, religious differences, cuisine. I mean, it doesn't really matter what aspect of civilization or life, I should say, that you're talking about. People would be very particular depending on where they were. And that's just not the case today. So you can have the situation you just talked about. I think the difficulty is that I think the question, or the root question that people are, that's controversial, is whether or not genetics has anything to do with it. And so this is, you don't really say this in the book, but I'll just ask you this because I've heard this described by others. Your friend, let's say, who's Chinese, who speaks like a Cajun, how would you categorize that? Would you categorize that as an adoption? I mean, he's been adopted into a culture that's not perhaps native to his ancestors. Like you said, he's not a 10th generation Cajun, but he's adopted their ways and been accepted as part of their group, just like families do this when they adopt. And I thought that was, to me, that maybe I'm overly simplistic, but I thought that's a perfect explanation for different kinds of people with maybe traditions and different genetic differences that go back, but they've been incorporated through, sharing a language, sharing religion, sharing other aspects of life, and now they've become one. Um, and that we do that on a family level. Why can't we do that on a national level? Do you think what I just said is that tracking with you? Do you agree, or is there anything you would say that you would disagree with what I just with how I presented it?
I mean,
Is adoption a good parallel?
yeah, there. I guess you could say there's a sort of adoption. I mean, there is obviously assimilation as well. I mean, it's difficult because like my kind of my method of analyzing these things, I kind of trying to avoid like these objective measurements and distinctions, and more just how we kind of experience the world.
Well, God
Um,
created nations, right? So that's
yeah. Well, I mean, but the thing with that is that, so I think that nations arise and their differences. Yeah, I mean, there is a component of like blood relations to all that, and I do talk about that in the book, and I make distinctions all about that. Um, but I think what's fundamental to a nation is not is more that they have developed a way of life independent of another nation, and so they have these kind of patterns of life that they pass on from generation to generation. And this doesn't preclude people who are from a different nation coming to that nation and coming to adopt those ways. So there's no like genetic barriers from someone from another nation coming to adopt these other ways. Um,
yeah. So
yeah,
you're
so
you're strictly speaking culture then when you talk nation, when you, because you use the word ethnicity in the book a lot, and
yeah,
that's, so you mean
yeah. This is
culture.
where, but I mean, again, I know, yeah, but I do define it. I separate it from race, but it's again, it's a part of the method. Like if you want to think of ethnicity as a purely objective thing that you do kind of a political, like a historical political geography, and yeah, there's like a very kind of strong racial, I guess, component to it. But I'm saying the method of actually experience is that this this objective measurement of race of just like a DNA test doesn't actually get you what kind of a culture or nation is. It's actually fundamentally a kind of a shared set of loves that are some universal, some are particular, and the actual, I guess, quote, purity of the blood composition of that ethnicity does not drive does not is not what's fundamental to actually keeps those people together. So I mean, I mean, just take like, so I went to West Point. West Point's a place where like most colleges, most people come from that region. Like, you're going to college in New York, most people are from New York or that area. At West Point, people come from all across the country because it's based upon congressional districts and how many people can get in and all that. So it's very diverse in terms of like regional diversity of the United States. And it's what you experience when you go there is that people are in the country, despite their regional differences, despite ancestry differences, they're all wearing the same flag on their shoulder. They're all patriotic. I mean, most of my guests were, and probably maybe a few guys smuggled in, but there was a unity despite this diversity, and just despite set like very different bloodlines and different like tracing ancestry to Europe or Asia or whatever.
Sure.
And there was this kind of unity of patriotism and willing to sacrifice for this country. And so I mean, this is a very difficult topic, and
It is, and
it makes everyone nervous to talk about it.
well,
Like what makes the United
you're
States a
right.
nation, all that.
Which is what I wanted
And
to get into next, but I don't. Yeah,
yeah,
I'm not trying to do a gotcha. Just, I mean, obviously you know that, but I'm not like the reason I think we have to talk about it is because even if we struggle along a little bit to some extent, it is something that is being talked about a lot. And this is what the other
yeah.
side especially wants to, they want to paint anyone who says they're a Christian nationalist as horrible in every way. And this is just one of the ways.
Yeah, so
Uh,
let me talk a little bit
so
about like kin and blood relations. And so I'm not going
yeah.
to do the convenient thing of saying that it's absolutely irrelevant to your connection to your nation. I just think that's obviously false. But what I mean by like blood relations is this: you have grandparents, great grandparents are back, and you have family stories. You know where they were, what they did, maybe how they got here. And most people kind of live fairly close to where their grandparents grew up, and or their parents, maybe the same town, maybe same region, maybe same state, whatever. And you have a unique love for your your blood relations. You love your grandparents more than others. Other older people usually. You love your parents more than there's a unique love there, and but that love uh kind of in a way what I say kind of enlivens your world. It's where if your grandparent worked at that factory, or your grandparent participated in that national event, like say World War II, or this is where your grandmother met and went to church, and or whatever, or this is where your grandparents were buried. Like all these different things that they've done, and how they've made their mark in their own way in the world. It becomes this thing where I love this place. I love this place, or I love this property. I love this house. I love this shop, this store, this factory, this school, this church, because you love them. And so it's like, in a sense, that blood relation translates into the world of to a place where that place it becomes an object of love, because that's the place where your grandparents did things, and that's where your grandparents or great grandparents did things with other other people's grandparents who live there today. And so there's a connection of people in place that these natural relations enliven. But your connection to others in that same place is not like a love for a friend or a family friend that you knew for a long time. You're concerned for them. That's not because they are related in blood. I mean, no one kind of like, oh, should I be friends with this guy? I mean, how much
No,
DNA
right,
do
right, right.
how much DNA do I share?
Show
Like
me your
no one
ancestry
does
test.
that. I mean, maybe a few weird people, but what it is that like you have this connection in a way through these people that you love kind of by nature. And
Mhm.
so there is a sense in which like blood relations matter, but that's kind of a conduit for you actually to love people who are widely different from you in terms of DNA or genetics, because these people worked with these people or whatever. They conducted life together. I mean, this kind of stresses the importance of kind of staying in a place for many generations, and also creating the making sure that kids can stay in that place. But anyway, the that's what I mean by like blood relations. So a nation is, to my mind, is not some sort of blood purity thing. But at the
Right.
same time, it does matter how long you've ancestrally been there, because then you've ancestrally been there with other people who have been ancestrally been there. And that creates a sort of like common spirit, not necessarily a common like natural relation, but a common spirit because of how that fuses together. I mean, just think of the unifying effect of, yeah, my grandfather fought in World War II. Um, I tell a story of a guy I met, and we were talking about our grandfather. I was like, yeah, my grandfather was a bandsman. Like he played the trumpet at dance bands in Honolulu during World War II, a uniform guy. He was drafty. He always said that the thing that saved his life was he played the trumpet, when he was 12 years old in high school. And so um, he played in dance bands. And this guy, oh yeah, my grandfather was, I don't know, like an airman or something in the Pacific Theater too, or whatever. I
Oh,
was like, oh, I wonder if your grandfather, like on R&R danced to my grandfather playing the trumpet. And who knows if they did. But it's one of those things where it's like, hey, like your grandfather participated in the same big national event as I did. I don't remember, what sort of that's. I mean, he might have been Italian. Who knows? But I mean, whatever it was, like this was an event that brought he and I together, and we could share like the same nation based upon those events. It wasn't me thinking, I wonder if this guy genetically is close to me. Like that's not how anyone thinks.
right. No, no,
It's
no one
it's
does.
it's not that. So anyway, that's what I mean by that. And I think that just like once you say it, that all should just make sense. I don't know. I mean, maybe I'm being arrogant or like overconfident, but it just should make sense that there is a relation that like
Well,
that's how national life works
well,
with.
I think what you're running up against, and you talk about this in the book, is the proposition nation idea that we all should just be bound together by a common set of propositions or precepts or something, abstract notions, and that should be enough. That should be the glue. And I think what you're getting at, and there's a few quotes you have. They're really short. I'll just read this. You said ethnicity is something experienced as familiarity with others in common language, manners, customs, stories, taboos, rituals, calendars, social expectations, duties, loves, and religion. You also say that blood relations matter for your ethnicity because your kin have belonged to this people on this land, to this nation, and this place. And so they bind you to the people and place, creating a common Volkgeist. And and that just, if you believe what you just said,
Yeah, like
that
a spear, like a common, like a that's
right.
what old guys people
I
get
know,
mad.
I know.
Oh,
Yeah,
you used a
it's a
German
German
word.
word. You're a
Yeah, but
Nazi. It's a
by the way, it's a
German word.
German word that far predates
It's a good.
Nazism people. So calm down, calm down.
Actually, it's funny. I didn't even just see this. I just noticed I wrote beside the word Volkgeist in like a joking way. Are you a Nazi? But
Yeah,
that's
yeah, yeah. Calm down, people. But part of the reason why I
um,
throw terms like that in there, I know people are gonna like think Nazi, but I'm hoping that when they do jump from Volksgeist to Nazi, that they then think, wait, maybe I shouldn't do that. Maybe I'm programmed to think
yeah,
like that.
maybe
Maybe I
maybe I'm
shouldn't
the
think like
problem.
that, and I should just calm down and chill out. And if that's yeah, so then that's why I don't sometimes. I guess full disclosure, this is one reason why I don't qualify a lot of my statements because I'm
Uh-huh.
hoping that 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 2, 3, 4% of the people who do freak out will then say, "Wait, should I freak out? I mean, is he really
No, it's
saying now?
brilliant.
Let's like, you know what I mean?" So hopefully to capture that few percentage points of people who can overcome their programming. But anyway,
No,
continue.
but your point though is well taken. No, and I'm glad you said that. But your point is well taken. That this is something that's tangible. This is something in the dirt. Put your hands right there. It's something that you feel. I mean, we break it down to a smaller level. The house, my grandfather's house, like in Mississippi, it fell apart, and the property's still there. And there's times I've wondered about. I didn't grow up in the house, but I'd love to buy it someday, that property, right? If I had became rich, and because it meant something to my family going back generations. And that's something that other people wouldn't understand who don't live in my family line. And so there is a proximity there, but it's based on so much more than just genetics. The genetic, obviously, he's my grandfather, so there's a genetic component. But if I was adopted into the family and there weren't genetics, I would still probably feel a similar way
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
because the warmth and the experiences I had with my grandfather and the love that was shown, and there's just so many even things I can't quite even put my finger on that I know are playing into why I would value that land, just like I would value a nation on a larger.
Like what you said is really important. And
Yeah.
it is I call it this affective value. like affective value. There's
Yes.
things in this world, and this is what's interesting is like these matter more to us than anything, or they should, but they generally do, and yet they're entirely unmarketable. Like your affection for that piece of dirt in Mississippi,
Yeah.
that's like to me it'd be like that's cool. I mean because I'm your friend, I can appreciate why you like it, and I can then like it all as well. I talked about Cicero and his friend, similar story in the book, but if you and I were strangers, I'd be like, okay, cool, dude. I mean, that's great, but I don't care about that dirt at all. But you do, and why do you? Because well, that's where you said grandfather, right? Your
Uh,
grandfather uh made his sort of print his his he that's where he was. That's where
yeah.
I guess you were with him,
Well, and the
and
stories that he
so
told,
enlivens our world, like
happened
our
there.
our world. This is why I hate like the propositional nation idea. It totally turns our world into this like this bare geographic space as if we're just robots, like we're just robots inhabiting this place so we can consume and comment about the movies we're watching on Twitter and just like constant like just consumption. That's all it is. But
Yeah.
but that's just not our world. Our world is a place that's been enlivened but with this like invisible, very personal but also collective affection for these things. And we should, and part of my point in the book is bringing this stuff up is that like this happens naturally. Like so much of what I'm saying is like this is just natural for us to think this way. But because of the various forces in our world that I think are trying to destroy that or sever it or make it bad or say you're evil, your grandparents are evil, and therefore that piece of dirt, John, that your grandfather loved, that's evil too.
Right.
And your relation to it is evil, and your love for it is evil because he was. Those kind of forces. Now, what I'm saying is that we need to become conscious of the fact that we have these loves because usually it just exists in the background of experience. Most like familiarity, like our preference to be among things that are familiar rather than foreign. Most of the time. Sometimes foreign things are very exciting, but the our preference for the familiar is something that we're drawn to naturally. But now we have to explicitly articulate it, make it explicit to consciousness, so that we can actually protect it, so we can act for it. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
No,
So,
that's a great point. And it actually, there's so many things that are in your book we haven't even talked about. But one of the things that I appreciated probably more than anything else is how you do go after this creedal nation or proposition nation concept, because this is the one thing it seems like that if you challenge it, not only does the left come after you, but so many on the quote unquote right come after you, even in
yeah.
Christianity. And it's foreign. I don't know. Actually, I'm curious to hear from you why Christians have just imbibed this. Like, this is such a new idea, this proposition nation concept. Where did it come from, and why does everyone believe it all of a sudden?
Well, it's just the fact that our theology, which is not even good, really theology, just that we've Christianized a popular sentiment, and it's I mean, there's people like I think Joe Carter said something like, yeah, the gospel is globalist, or we should be globalist, and they'll just they will just Christianize. They'll use theological concepts or sentiments to just make us think that this is how Christians ought to live and think. But yeah, I mean, it would be pretty bizarre, I think, if God created us so that we have this propositional nation idea that's just somehow we're all linked together in this on this space because we all affirm some ideas. It's not. I'm not saying it's I think it's wrong objectively, but it just violates who we are as human beings. Again, like we have particular loves from experience and activity. Not it's pre-rational, it's pre-reflective, it's prejudicial in the good sense,
Right.
and that's how we live. I mean, one just to kind of because we've been so far away from this, because we're Americans are so taught to kind of have this self-hatred or this very ambivalence towards ourselves. Uh, just think of like the house you grew up in. So if you grew up in like a typical, let's just say it's really one of those cookie cutters suburban subdivisions we're not supposed to like anymore. Like we're not
Right.
supposed to like
Right.
those things. Every house looks exactly the same in a row, and there's just little trees here and there. But you grew up in that one house that's like 3 rows down, or like 3 houses down, looks just like the one next to it, or the houses next to it. Um, that house means a lot to you. I mean, let's assume again you have a positive childhood. Obviously, like I sometimes I think of the Forrest Gump where Ginny throws rocks at her house. You know that movie.
Yeah, yep.
Obviously, she had a negative experience, and bulldozing was good. Anyway, but that one house that you grew up in, where it was a place of love, it was a place of affection, of parents and siblings and grandparents and friends that came over there. Um, that neighborhood where you probably had neighborhood kids, friends, that house right there is not just a house among houses. Like it's a home. It's like your home.
Yeah.
And even though it has no more market value than the house next to it, it's like imbued or invested or adorned, whatever term you want to use, with these like affections that you can't transfer, you can't sell it, you can't do anything like that. But it matters a lot. And to deny that is just absurd. To think like the propositional nation guys, essentially everything, like all of space is reduced to this like market value, because there's no human, like there's no way to kind of for humans to relate to things in something higher than that. And my point is that like really what makes a nation is not just like common affirmation of statements, but it's a common love of the place itself. It's a common love of this actual real place. Like it's people who live on geographic space, but more than that, that space is now enlivened as a place that we can all love in common. And that just seems to me to be objectively good and better than otherwise. And it's just natural to us as humans.
Well, and you see in scripture that this is not an unbiblical concept at all, with the way that the nation of Israel was formed, and the importance of the land, and how even the tribes were supposed to, in the year of Jubilee, the land went back to those who owned it, or stewarded it, in those tribes. Paul's even affection for his own people. I mean, all these things are just so part and parcel to who we are as humans, that the denial, it's strange to me that we've kind of reached this weird point in history where denying that is makes you a better person. You have moral high ground supposedly if you
Yeah.
deny that.
Well, again,
Uh,
yeah, it's like I think there's a few things. One is like there's an assumption that that our instincts are bad. That like that there's a Christian doctrine of sin that I think is abused, and I think it's corrupted. I think it's ahistorical. I don't think it's reformed. I think people are total depravity means we're so bad. Well, no, I think there's obviously we're very bad, but I'm saying that these basic instincts we have for home and place and people, these are actually good instincts. Like this being drawn towards what is familiar is actually good. It's natural. The fall did not like fundamentally eradicate the principles of our being. Like they can be directed poorly, they can be abused, they can be applied poorly in very destructive ways and evil ways, but the actual principles themselves remain intact. And this again, even Calvin basically says that in his Institutes, he says that all, um, well, generally, fallen people still retain the principles of what is right and orderly. But of course, they abuse them and all that. But so I think there's like a foreign impulse in us to to deny those instincts, you know. So there's that, and then there's also the sense in which they think grace destroys nature. So you have both like
mhm.
the critique of uh they're kind of contradictory, but you have the critique of the instincts, and then you have this idea that grace, well, wait, no, now instead of being, they'll have like ridiculous arguments like, well, we're no longer like Israel and identify as a nation. Now we identify as a global people. No, now
Right,
we're a
right.
global church,
The
and
church, yeah,
that
right.
should be our only love, or they say almost like the first love, to pretty much the exclusion of any sort of national love. And then they'll throw out words like idolatry. Then none of these things are none of them I think are historical with regard to historic Protestant thought, and they're almost always utterly incoherent as presented, and what they are and is simply just Christianizing globalist sentiments. That's just what it is. The reason why no one you don't find these things in older texts is because they weren't socialized to think this way, but we are, and so they're just this sort of globalism is just Christianized.
Well,
I think we just got to critique that.
I love what you do, and because you take some of the and laymen will understand this. Um, as much as there's academic stuff in your book, you go through the popular notions that are supposedly counter your position, like, well, we don't have a nation, we're this pilgrim people and the church is our nation, or things that you commonly hear from even like gospel coalition types. In fact, I think you quote Jonathan Lehman, you quote Russell Moore, you go after some of these guys who we would readily know in the evangelical world, at least, and you take them to task for some of these ridiculous things that they promoted, the basic conflations. And that's one of them that I get so irritated hearing that. Well,
Well,
yeah,
it's like a luxury belief. Like the idea that that our nation as Christians is, you know, every Christian in on the planet uh is one of those things that you can't help but see it as a luxury belief that would have been absurd in the past. I mean, there is a sense in which we are kind of one nation. I would understand that as being we're sort of like restored people or restored humanity, but
right.
that doesn't actually extinguish the necessity of having uh of like earthly sort of nationalities or differences along those lines. But I think it's a luxury belief because I mean the gospel does not provide like this gospel language. There's no gospel culture. There's no kind of universal like once you've been a Christian now you have to conform and learn a new language and wear all the same thing and have the same songs and music and there's no like there's no it's not as if the gospel comes with this new like set of what we call a nation, which is like cultural distinctives and all that. It doesn't do that. And we still have to live in this world. We still have to seek to live well in this world, and that includes working together in common civil life.
Yeah,
If how do you like if so, which means we have to have, for example, like a common language. We you know if people if no one speaks the same language, we can't actually do a lot together. I mean, this is so it's a very kind of luxury belief that like what is a nation, what are the goods that a nation provides? Well, it provides all these like cultural goods. We know what to do, how to do, we know how not to offend people. We can construct a building together because we speak the same language. We can call out measurements for the guy to the guy who's cutting the wood. We can do all these things together that we couldn't do if it was just like just gospel culture. But it just doesn't make any sense. You know, it's only plausible because we can just go to Walmart and we can pick up our food and stuff and go through the line and the cashier can barely speak English. We all know what to do. Like it's just this very luxury like modern West position that if people were thrown into conditions where if there was more necessity, where we actually had to look face to face and work with one another to just get the basic things of life, it would just be ridiculous.
oh yeah. Well, if
You
we
know,
have a real problem, like a real emergency, like a nuclear holocaust, or some real economic problem, I'm not talking about what we're going through right now. You'll see people form divisions right away, and there
yeah,
won't be civil. Yeah, all this talk will be nothing.
because there's yeah, because I mean the farther away you are from necessity, where you're just full of an abundance of resources, the more you can kind of get away with things kind of like this, where you are very kind of wasteful or you can you don't actually need to work face to face with people when there's like this economies of scale and international trade and all this. Um, but yeah, like if we're thrown into like a closer condition of necessity, which would be essentially pre World War II, I guess, until the dawning of the creation of man, you would have to kind of work with people where you understand each other. I mean, there's
Yeah,
a so in terms of language, there's a line in Augustine City of God where he says, like, if you don't know the same language as a guy, you're worse than dogs. Like that's his direct quote, pretty much. You're worse than dogs, meaning that like at least dogs who can't speak, they can look at each other and kind of know what's up. Like they don't need a language to I mean they have their own sort of language, I guess, but
right, right.
they don't need a verbal kind of language. Whereas for man, and he gets this from Aristotle, maybe Plato, but it's this idea that like we need speech because one the way we're designed because we have a concern about justice, like sort of equity between each other, and we can't actually live one another. We can't communicate rights or justice without an actual language. And in that sense, we become like worse than dogs, because then we can't even achieve what would be distinctively human together. And so you'd have to have like this, and again, common language. But I mean, I'm kind of going on and on about this, but it's
Oh,
just
it's
such just like
important.
ridiculous notion that you can that somehow like that the church, like the church as a global entity, replaces the goods that you get out of national um, belonging.
Yeah, and I've seen it do damage, and I think that's why I'm sensitive to it to some extent. Growing up with people who, from Christian households, who would even say that they're not even part of a denomination. They're just we just we're just the church, and that and nothing else mattered. And you see where those kids go when they
Mhm.
have freedom, and it's usually not to good places. It's just not a recipe for it, because it's not it denies human longings, the natural human longings we have. You say this about Russell Moore, Stephen. You say Moore wants a society and government that actively destroy communities like Mayberry and use every means to manipulate your children to reject Christ. He doesn't want mere liberal neutrality, but active hostility. And there's a few things that I think, questions I have that I can sort of uh, use to set this quote up that you just made in the book. But you talk about shutting the border down to people coming in. You talk about the need for there to be generations of people to get to know each other once again, for there to be a nation that's strong and vibrant. And you basically set up some of these evangelical thinkers as they're the enemies of the nation, because of their affinity for, I guess, a secular, sort of blank on non-Christian state that's hostile. And you know what I see you doing in the whole book is trying to preserve. How do we strengthen our country? And there's these forces lined up on the other side. And Moore, of course, one of these people who wants open borders as well. Um, isn't Mayberry a figment of the imagination? Is there really a
Mhm.
Mayberry? Uh, talk to us about this a little bit. This ideal Mayberry that you have, that we're supposed to be shooting for preserving.
Yeah. So I mean, you're talking about like several different things here.
I know. That's
But
so complicated.
um,
Go any
yeah, I
direction
mean,
you
so
want.
on the Russell Moore piece, yeah, I do criticize him for a couple pages for a blog post he did, and I don't think he ever retracted or changed what he said, but I was not like exaggerating what that blog post said. In fact, I as much as I dislike the work and the rhetoric of someone like Russell Moore, after I read that, I was actually surprised he said what he said in that blog post. And it basically says that it's he accused a sort of Mayberry like place of being a place that, yeah, it was nice and pleasant and people stayed married, but I think the line is, but it was hardly revival or something like that.
Right, right.
Uh, and then he goes on to say how it was basically good that Rome persecuted Christians because it showed who was an atheist or who was a non-Christian, who was a Christian. And the argument basically, there's no other way to understand the argument, is that he literally wants a place like Mayberry where there's some hypocrisy, but there's pleasant life and pleasant relations, mutual understanding, that it's safe. Everyone knows each other. I mean, you couldn't, I mean, it's a kind of ideal setting for most people. I don't know if it ever actually existed, probably not, but it's a sort of ideal that people would want. If you're raising kids, why wouldn't you want to live in Mayberry? You know what I mean? Um, but instead, he wants actual persecution, and he wants parents subjected like we are today. I live in North Carolina. I mean, it's crazy, Central North Carolina, and even in the school district in my county, which once was a very conservative county until Raleigh screwed it up, people who worked there and all that. Um, they now want to like force gender, like a some gender thing on where a kid takes a survey to see if he's actually a boy or actually a girl. I mean, it's just I can't fathom how people would line up and say cultural Christianity is bad, how we want persecution when the average parent, I mean, you and I mean, I don't want to be elitist, but like John, you and I are very kind of aware of what's going on in the world. We follow what's happening in our country and its forces at work, and we try to analyze them. We talk about it. So we're kind of at a higher order in a sense, just because we put the time and energy and effort into it. But most people are just average people. Like most, that's average, right? Most people don't know what their kids are being subjected to, or they have a kind of a vague sense of it. Or they're kind of nominal Christians who just want to do what they always did, which is send their kids to public school. And now all of a sudden your daughter is coming home with weird hair color and claims she's a boy. I mean, why? It boggles my mind that like people like Moore would just be like, bring on the persecution. It's incredibly unloving to your neighbor. I mean, we always talk about loving your neighbor. Well, is there anything more like unloving than saying, well, you know what? The average person is going to be subjected to a relentless onslaught of the most absurd moral ideas you can imagine. But we as Christians, we're going to stay winsome and nice, and we're going to spend our days attacking those to our right who want to do something.
Right.
I mean, imagine like it's the whole. It's like evangelicalism has descended into this like absurdity of passivity, given what they see in the world. I mean, I'm in a small county in North Carolina, and they're going to subject the kids to gender ideology.